There's one thing for certain in this life, and it's that it's going to end, whether you're ready for it or not. For many people, that cold, hard finality is enough to motivate you to live every day to the fullest, chase your dreams and hug your loved ones a little tighter. Because especially with that last one, seeing them again is never promised. But for some people out there, they know differently. This is a collection of stories from real people who have had encounters that they couldn't explain, but it left them knowing that their loved ones were still around, whether they wanted them to be or not. Our first story comes from Michelle, showing that while loved ones can bring us comfort once they're no longer with us, they could choose a better time to let us know. About 30 years ago, I went to visit my aunt, whose husband had died a few months prior. Her house was split-level style, and I was sleeping in one of the 3 bedrooms on the top floor. There was also a bathroom on that floor. As I was falling asleep, I heard someone moving around the bedroom next to mine. All night long, someone was walking around the bedroom and going back and forth to the bathroom. I thought my aunt must be ill or unable to sleep. Yeah, if you can hear movement all night, someone is having a rough night of it. At breakfast the next morning, I asked if she was okay and told her what I'd heard. Her eyes got wide, and she said that she'd not been up at all. She said that that room was her late husband's, and he would use it when he couldn't sleep, so as to not wake her. I was mildly uncomfortable and said that I must have mistaken the settling of the old house for steps. The next night, just after I'd drifted off to sleep, it started again. This time, I was alert and scared. I sat up and really listened, and it was definitely closet doors opening and closing, and steps. I'm embarrassed to say I was actually frozen in fear. I don't think there's anything embarrassing about that, to be honest. When you're completely awake, you can tell the difference between the creaking of a house settling and someone walking across the room and opening doors. I'm not sure how long I sat there, but finally got the courage to get up and peek in the hall. Everything just went quiet. I stood there for a couple of minutes, what felt like hours, and went back to bed. I was trying to convince myself I imagined it. I was awakened several times with the walking and sound of doors, but never had the courage to get up again. Totally fair. The next day, I inspected my uncle's room and didn't see anything that would explain what I heard. I really tried to rationalise the last 2 nights. I asked my aunt if she'd heard anything, and she said no. But she really hoped that it was her late husband because she felt comforted if he was there. My last night there, I was very uncomfortable going to bed and stayed up really late. I hoped I would be so tired that I would fall into a deep sleep and hear nothing. Once again, I was woken by the sound of a door and steps in the hall. I lay there, hoping it would stop, but the steps continued back down the hall and to the room next to mine. Then the door, and more steps, and the shuffling of bifold closet doors. I don't know how long I lay there, but I finally drifted back to sleep. Then a door slammed, and I bolted up and said, "Please, be quieter so I can sleep." Then it went still and quiet. I heard nothing the rest of the night. I left the next day. I still don't know for sure what I heard, but I think it was my late uncle and his ghostly late-night roaming. You've got to love a ghost who listens, though. Sorry, uncle, would you mind keeping it down a tad? Rearranging your wardrobe in the middle of the night is not great for us getting a good night's sleep. I don't know, could this just possibly wait until morning? I wonder if your aunt ever did hear anything for herself as well. It's one thing your niece saying that she's experiencing this, but to experience it for yourself, that just makes it undeniable then, at least to you. But this next story from Mark, you can see why his mother found it very difficult to ignore what he was saying as a young boy. My story is from my mum. I was around 1 at the time and she carried me downstairs and put me down at the bottom. Apparently, I would always follow her into the kitchen, but I didn't this time. Yeah, when young kids go off and do their own thing that's out of character for them, instantly suspicious. My mum said she then came out of the kitchen and saw me pointing to the top of the stairs, shouting, "Lady." Kids really do say the darndest things, don't they? She always says she thought she saw a figure looking over my cot, which briefly resembled her grandmother once, and would also find the baby gates open with no one in the house. It certainly sounds like you possibly had another caregiver there in the house with you. Just family members though, isn't it? As soon as there's a new baby in the family, they can't resist popping round. Not even death is going to keep them away. But here's another story, this time from Thomas, of another babysitter from beyond the grave. It really does take a village, doesn't it? Or is that a cemetery? For context, my great-grandmother died 2 days before my parents got married, so I never knew her. My parents' first home was a new build that they had built. It was the early 90s, and so that was still an achievable thing for average 20-somethings back then. For a few years, everything seemed normal. Then, I was born. A few things would start happening that were unexplainable. For example, I would wake in the night and my parents would hear me on the baby radio. And then I would stop crying and make that noise babies make when they see something they like. By the time my parents would get across the hallway to the nursery room, I would be back asleep and my dummy in my mouth. Surely that would be a bit creepy though, to hear that on the baby monitor. Your kid crying their eyes out and then all of a sudden they're happy as Larry and back to sleep. Or would you be too sleep deprived and basically just happy that they'd got themselves back off to sleep? And so then you just wouldn't even question it. Parents, weigh in on that one. Speaking of that nursery, directly opposite it was a radiator that was always freezing cold, even when they had the heating on max. So my parents were convinced it was where my great-grandmother was keeping watch. As I grew up, my mum dug out the family photo album and showed me photos of the family. One day, I asked, "Who is that lady?" Mum then answered that it was my great-grandmother. And then I said, "Oh, okay, she looked after me when I was a baby." What was I just saying about the things that kids come out with? Later that week, my nana took me to the graveyard to put flowers on my great-grandmother's grave. Even though I had never been before, I ran straight up to the correct grave and stood there, waiting for my, by now slightly spooked, nana to arrive. She was a slow walker, it was a gravel path, she was in heels, so very understandable. We put the flowers on the grave, and as we left, I turned and said, "Bye-bye, Nanny," which, understandably, creeped my poor Nana out. I can imagine that would have been a very interesting conversation when Nana gets back to your parents' house. What is strange is that spookiness happened for a couple of years, and then it stopped. Mum and Dad didn't know why until my uncle and aunt announced that they were expecting a baby. And the haunting then started up at their house. With great similarity being that the radiator closest to the room with the baby would be freezing cold 24/7. Oh, Nanny's moved! A year or two went by and the spookiness came back to us. And over the years we would get odd glimpses in the corner of our eyes. Pots and pans moved every now and then with no explanation. Our pet dogs and cats would watch invisible things moving about. You know, usual haunting stuff. But then, a couple of years ago, we had the strongest haunting I think we've had since I was a baby. My sister, wife and I were at the family home having a bit of an emotional heart-to-heart conversation. It was getting late and my dad keeps chickens at the house, so I said that I'd go and shut the coop up. When I got back into the house, I decided to wash my hands in the kitchen sink because they'd got a little bit of mud on them as I'd found an egg in the field. And as I lifted my head up after washing my hands, you know, looking down, making sure that I'd got all the mud off, I saw, in the reflection of the window in front of me, clear as day, a glimpse of a pair of legs in brown tights and an old pleated skirt. The type of skirt that looks like it has layers. As if they were turning and walking out of the kitchen to the hallway. I hollered to my missus and sister, "Has anything weird happened while I've been out?" And they said yes. My sister said the dog was really on edge and was staring at the kitchen door. My wife said it had gone utterly freezing, despite there being a log fire burning in the living room that they were in. Both said that at one point they thought they heard something rustle or move in the kitchen. Neither investigated as they thought it was me coming back into the house quietly. That is, until I actually got back into the house. Now, was a pleated skirt something that your great-grandmother would have worn? I'm going to guess that would be likely. Very interesting that the familiar freezing cold feeling returned again. Maybe she thought that it'd been long enough, it was time to drop in for a visit. She can absolutely come around next time the UK has a heatwave. But sometimes our long-lost family members are doing more than just checking in. Sometimes they're possibly out here, actively trying to keep us safe. Like this story from Ailey. I grew up spending a lot of time at my grandmother's house in Las Vegas. What I'm about to describe are only a few of the experiences. There were many more, and listing them all would take hours. But these are the moments that stayed with me, the ones that still feel different when I think about them. The house was a split-level home built in the late 1960s or early 70s. When you walked in the front door, there were stairs going up and stairs going down. To the right was a converted garage we called the piano room. That room never felt right. Even in the middle of a Las Vegas summer, it was colder in there. Not just cool, cold. And being inside felt hostile, like something was watching you and resented that you were there. None of us liked going in. We only entered if we absolutely had to. As someone who doesn't do well with the heat, that presents a bit of a dilemma. Will I take the scary room for a chance at cooling down? Or do I get very cranky and stay away from the ghost? Downstairs was where my cousins and I spent most of our time. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a living area. At the bottom of the stairs, you had to turn left to enter the living room. There was a closet right there. And the door would swing open suddenly. We all learned to walk past with our arms stretched out so that it wouldn't slam in our faces. It became a joke, but it was a nervous joke. Ah yes, the type where you have to hide the abject terror behind humour. That is horrendous though. It would just swing out at you and hit you in the face. One night, when I was a teenager, I was teasing my uncle about the house. I said I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I said if the house was haunted, so what? They're dead. What can they do to me? I fear I can already see what's coming next. And right as I said that, a heavy framed painting that had been sitting on top of my grandmother's bookshelf lifted up and dropped straight onto my head. My uncle said he saw it rise before it fell. After that, I never mocked the house again. Yeah, there it is. Another incident happened when I was 13. I had the flu and was sleeping in one of the downstairs bedrooms. I remember waking up to my grandmother sitting next to me. She touched my forehead with her cool hand, spoke softly, and laid a damp washcloth on my head. She stayed until I fell asleep. The next morning, the washcloth was still on my pillow. I picked it up and went upstairs to thank her. Her face went pale. She told me that she'd been working the graveyard shift at the casino all night and had just gotten home. No one else had been in the house. Oh no, 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 no. Then she disappeared into a drawer and came back with an old black and white photograph. She asked me if the woman in the picture had been in the room. I said yes, confused, because the woman looked exactly like her. She told me it wasn't her. It was her mother, my great-grandmother. She died when I was an infant. The room I'd been sleeping in had been her bedroom. The scariest experience happened when I was about 15. I woke up in the middle of the night to my cat hissing at the foot of my bed, clawing at the air. I looked up, and above me was something I still struggle to describe. It was like a floating black void, a shape that swallowed light, and inside it were red eyes. I am so out. Nope. It would descend towards me. My cat would lunge at it, so it would retreat to the ceiling. But then it would come down again, over and over. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer until it finally vanished. For years, I told myself it was just a night terror. But one day, I talked to my cousins, 3 of them, all around my age, and they told me that they had seen the same thing, in the same room, over different years. When my grandfather died, my grandmother sold the house and moved across town. We still wonder if the new owners experienced anything, or if whatever was there was tied to our family. Personally, I think that that house was some kind of portal, something that allowed things in and out, good and bad. Whether it was the land, the house itself, or something about our family, I don't know. But I never felt anything like that house again. And I hope I never do. That cat was paying his rent for the year that night, protecting you from the amorphous red-eyed horror trying to lunge at you. We actually don't deserve cats. Possibly the reason that your great-grandmother was still around too, because of whatever else was in that house. Whether it was a portal, like you said, letting in that badness, so she decided to keep you all safe from it. But sometimes it's not the things that we see, the glimpses that we catch in the corner of our eyes. This next story shows how just a strange little incident, which very well easily could just be a coincidence, could still provide some comfort that loved ones may still be around. In the deep south in the US, I would visit my dearest friend in rural Florida. It was common for a multi-generational family farm that the next generation would build a new house, and the old house would be called, well, the old house. Sometimes the older parents would keep living there until they died, and this was the case with her folks. By the time my friend and I played around the old house, there was no electricity, and the doors were hanging off its hinges. One day, we looked back on the old front porch, and the front light was shining. Both of us saw it, and we ran to the back to look at the electrical box. Everything was still pulled out, so the light was impossible. When we went back around, the light was out. It never happened again over the many times I visited. Or maybe the older folks were still sitting out on the front porch one last time to watch you lot playing. That must be nice for them though, if they're still there, seeing that the younger generations are still there on the land that they farmed. But for others, like Jessica, their experiences are a lot more intense and happen throughout their lives. Mine all started when I was about 1 year old. My mother told me that about 4 to 5 years before I was born, my grampy passed away in my nan's house from a massive heart attack on the landing just outside their bedroom. This house is in the valleys of South Wales. They moved his favourite chair from the living room to the kitchen, where the first thing happened. I was sat on the floor in front of the chair, laughing, smiling, and baby-talking to the chair with no one sat in it. Just always a great start, kids being creepy. The same thing happened the following weekend, but I was looking up the stairs, doing the same thing. Then one weekend I said, "That man is nice to me and Nanny's," to my mother in the car going home. Now she thought I maybe meant my dad. I said no. She then asked if it was my uncle. I said no, and kept repeating, "The man in Nanny's is nice to me." There were only 2 men in my life at that point, so she had no clue who I was on about. The following weekend, when she dropped me off there, she asked if I could see the man that is nice to me. I said no. I then looked up above the fireplace where their family photo was and pointed, saying, "Him." She then pointed to my uncle. I said no, him. The only other him was my grampy. She said that she got the chills, as I had never met him and had only seen photos of him. I am just living for stories like this. But why for so many of us does it seem that we stop seeing our relatives once we get a year or 2 older? The next thing happened many years later, when I was around 13 or 14. I had a sleepover at a friend's house, and we could hear heavy boots walking up and down the landing a couple of times throughout the evening. We just thought, it's an old house, must just be the house settling. But our minds are thinking, it sounds like boots. When we went upstairs to bed, we decided that we'd put some flour on the landing since her mother was out, and so we knew she wouldn't be walking through it, just to see. The sign of a great paranormal investigator in the making, collecting objective data. You love to see it. A few hours maybe went by when we heard a loud bang that woke us both up. We went running to the bedroom door, opened it as quick as we could, and saw in the flour there was 2 boot prints on the far end, and an old musket ball sitting in the flour just outside the bedroom door. We slammed that door shut and both hid in the corner of her bedroom, waiting until the sun came up. We must have fallen asleep at some point as we woke up and the sun was up. We left the bedroom and there were no footprints and no musket ball. The flour seemed untouched. Wait, They were just gone. For you both to see the boot prints and the musket ball though. What? Fast forward again to when I moved into my first flat at 19. I was sat in the living room and I heard the fan I had in the bedroom click, as if someone had moved the head of the fan up or down. I then heard the chest of drawers drawer open and shut, and the TV turned itself on in there. Someone was settling in for the night with or without you. The dog that I had at the time, she's sadly passed away now, would sleep on my bed every night. And after all of this happened, she was lying on my bed during the night, and she was just growling at the bedroom door on and off most of the night. I'm starting to get the impression that this is never a good sign. Then, during winter, I had a space heater in the bedroom. It was off, but plugged into the extension lead. I was just drifting off to sleep, and it clicked on. I jokingly said, "Cold, are you, ghosty?" It then knocked itself back off. Trying to be slick turning the heater on. Pay some rent first and then we'll talk, ghost. I was then sitting in the living room and suddenly I heard something hard hitting the wooden floor. I looked to see that it was a small something. I have no idea where it came from, but I picked it up and threw it outside so the dog wouldn't eat it. That's something I think must have been a typo, as it said walk, and usually I can decipher autocorrect. The only thing I could think is rock, maybe? But Jessica, if you see this, please let us know what fell on the floor. Periodically through my life, I get random smells like cigarette smoke, which I believe to be my father's mother, who smoked her whole life. She passed when I was 3. Also, something else I believe to be her was one of the knitted people she made me moved on the shelf I have them on. And one has also been pushed off the shelf. She's decided she doesn't like where you've placed them, clearly. I also get the smell of fresh flowers, which I believe to be my nan, who passed away in 2020. I also sometimes feel her presence as if she was standing right next to me during hard times. But then I also sometimes get the feeling that I'm being watched at night, and it makes me want to run. Nothing is consistent. But just seems to come and go as if something is just passing through and will sometimes open and close the door on its way out. I mean, at least they sometimes have the courtesy of shutting the door once they're done. It certainly does seem that you did have a handful of other family members dropping in on you to make sure that you're okay, which is a really lovely, comforting thought. But it is also nice to know that even if your loved one can't be with you in person, or even, I suppose, in spirit, sometimes they may be able to use technology to let you know that they're okay. Like this story from Chris. Huge fan here. Thank you very much. I was listening to another podcast yesterday about phone calls from the dead, and it reminded me of my own experience, and my wife has suggested I send it to you. Back in 1987, I was 15 years old and living with my family at the family home in Camberley in Surrey. It was a large house that was bought when my parents and my father's parents combined funds to buy it, and then they would all share as they lived out their retirement. Their share of the house would naturally pass to my parents when they died. Within a few years, both my grandparents did pass on, and the house was left to my mum and dad. As you will be well aware, 1987 was long before mobile phones were common, and communication was largely by landline phones. We had 2 in our house. One was on a small seat/table in the entrance hall of the house by the front door, opposite what was my grandparents' ground floor bedroom, and the other was on my parents' bedside table upstairs in their first floor bedroom. In the year my grandmother passed, I was home alone one day in the early summer as I was on study leave for my GCSE exams, and my parents, both teachers, and my 2 older brothers were all out at work. Those really were the best days though. I think I ended up having something like 11 weeks off from classes with the study leave and then summer holidays, although I did pay for it by having a GCSE maths exam on my birthday. May babies will relate. It was a warm sunny day and I was sitting in the garden studying when the phone rang. Nothing unusual there, so I went in to answer the phone on the ground floor. Upon answering, I said hello and stated the number, as was the norm at the time, only to be met with an initial silence, followed by the obvious breathing of a person on the other end. What I perceived to be clearly the breathing of an elderly female. I repeatedly said hello, but nothing was said from the other end. Just this slightly laboured breathing for about 30 seconds before the line went dead. I frowned and thought it was weird, but initially assumed it was a wrong number dialed by a confused elderly lady and I put the handset back down on the receiver to end the call. Yeah, totally would be your standard reaction to that. I turned around, and for a reason I cannot explain to this day, I went upstairs into my parents' bedroom where the only other phone in the house was in place. I walked in to find the phone, an 80s trim phone, was not in its usual place on the bedside table, but rather on the bed itself, with the handset off the hook and lying next to the main body of the phone on the bed. Initially, I simply thought that someone must have made a call before leaving that morning and left the phone that way. I hung it up and put it back on the nightstand and turned away and started walking down the stairs. Then I realised there is only one line into the house. If that phone was off the hook, then neither phone could ring. You will also remember that back then, if you left a phone off the hook for more than about a minute, it played a very loud alarm to alert you to the fact that it was off the hook, but there had been no such alarm. Needless to say that this sent a chill through me that I will never forget, and I remained in the garden for the rest of the day, staring through the hall at the phone and praying it would not ring again while I was home alone. I'm happy for you to use this in one of your YouTube videos if you felt that it was spooky enough. Yeah, definitely spooky enough. What? The way that your realizations just piled on top of each other. More and more evidence that this whole thing just isn't adding up. That is very strange. I can imagine that not a lot of quality studying was done for the rest of the day. So what are we thinking? Grandmother, perhaps? Checking in on how your GCSEs are going? But this next story from Lauren takes an entirely different turn. And I'd say that even though it happened in the family home, whatever was going on was not a loved one coming back. This horrifying event took place in my parents' home in Pocahontas, Mississippi. It occurred about 8 or 9 years ago when my sister and her fiancé were visiting from Grenada. A bit of the backstory: my sister Tiffany and her fiancé Ryan were living in a haunted home with a resident ghost named Sue. A ghost named Sue. If Johnny Cash had written a Halloween song. Cabinets would fly open, doors would slam, and chairs would go flying across the floor. Every time I stayed the night, I felt watched and just full of anxiety for no reason. I refused to visit ever again after seeing something peep into my bedroom there, and I never went back. Nope, don't like that. I will be at a hotel down the road next time, thank you very much. They came to visit my parents, and let's be clear, I have never seen anything weird or felt anything weird in my parents' home. My sister and Ryan were visiting, and we all got ready for bed and went to our rooms. I couldn't sleep, and at around 2:30 a.m, I heard their bedroom door open and someone walk into the bathroom. I peep my door open and see someone is in the bathroom and my sister's bedroom door is closed. I peep their door open and my sister and Ryan are both sound asleep in bed. I get very scared and tiptoe back to my room and I'm freaking out. I stand at my door and peep through, and an identical version of my sister steps out, wearing an old-fashioned, full-length nightgown. I hear the door close, and I screamed. Ryan came into the hallway, and I tell him what happened, and he said, yeah, happens all the time at our house. Oh, this is a common thing, you say. You have an old-timey mimic at home that packed up with you for your family visit. How lovely. Could that have possibly been information you shared with the group beforehand? My cousin travels for work and often stays with my parents while in the area. She saw something that scared her so badly, she refuses to stay with my parents now. She refused to tell me what she saw. Like I mentioned earlier, I have never been afraid there, and I've lived there when I was younger. Okay, so what on earth happened to your sister to have something like that attached to her? And did that possibly leave something behind which then scared your cousin? I have a lot of questions here, and none of them I think I really want the answer to. But sometimes when it is people from our lives coming back to make their presence known to us from the other side, they may do more harm than good, like in this story from Shane. Well, I have never been a believer before in the paranormal until this happened. It was back in 2021. It was July and I was with my ex-girlfriend, her mum and her sister. Her sister's partner had died 3 days before and we were there to support my ex's sister. Now, he was a violent alcoholic and died of sepsis. He would come downstairs in the night and always have a drink of water with his favourite pint glass and then leave it in the sink. We were all in the front room. It was about 9 p.m. and we all heard a loud bang and the sound of shattering glass coming from the kitchen. I jumped up and went to the kitchen to find his pint glass in the sink. It was shattered into pieces. What on earth? Is this a case of if I can't have it anymore, then no one else can? We were all freaked out by this. Yeah, pretty understandably, but carried on with our evening until about 11 p.m. We heard another noise come from the kitchen, and so I went to find out what it was. As I went into the kitchen, all of the windows and the back door were wide open. They had previously been locked. There was no way they could have just opened. We were all completely freaked out. The smoke alarm then decided to go off on its own. It was a brand new smoke alarm that had only just been fitted. This happened all through the night. We stayed up all night, too scared to go to sleep. It's safe to say that we never went back to that house. My ex's sister moved shortly after that happened. But ever since then, I have believed in the paranormal. I think you have to actually experience these things for yourself. And that's my story. Thanks for listening, and I hope you will feature this spooky story. Yeah, that is spooky. First of all, I am glad that your ex's sister was able to move away from that house. I can imagine it didn't have the nicest of memories attached to it. And I hope that that was the end of the activity for her. But whatever that was, if it was the alcoholic partner, that is some angry, violent activity. Smashing his own pint glass, opening up all of the locked windows and doors, and then having the smoke alarm keep going off all night. Just maximum disruption. Whatever happened to just being glimpsed walking out the kitchen in a pleated skirt? But a huge thanks goes out to Michelle, Mark, Thomas, Ailey, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right by the way, Jessica, Chris, Lauren, Shane, and the anonymous listener for sending in their stories. I feel like creepy ghost stories are fantastic. We love a good scare every now and then. But then with the paranormal, there is also this other side where it can have an amazing ability to provide comfort to some people. Yeah, parents may get very creeped out at the time by their young kids pointing to the friendly man in their bedroom who turns out to be your grandfather or something. But to come to the realization that somewhere, somehow, your lost loved ones are still there around you. That is an incredible thing to be able to believe. That is, of course, not the case in all instances, as proven by Shane's story. But I also just want to say a big thanks to all of you two who have sent in your stories. Every single one has been read through, and I will make it my mission to tell as many as possible on this channel. So if you'd like to send in a story, something that happened to you when you were growing up, or even if you live in a haunted house now, I would love to hear about all of your unexplained experiences. Please send me an email to hello@don'tscareclaire.com or use the Google form pinned in the comments section and the description. But if you enjoyed this collection of stories, as told to me by the real people who experienced them, then please do like the video. And if you enjoy hearing stories like this, make sure that you subscribe. I chat about the history behind the mysteries as well as first-hand witness accounts every week. But that is all from me today. Go and get yourself a drink of water, stay hydrated. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. I keep hearing some sort of ticking noise, and it's very suspicious when I have candles on behind me. I cannot tell what the ticking noise is though. That's suspicious. I genuinely have no idea what that noise was that I was hearing before. It's completely stopped now, and none of my sets burned down, so that's really good.